Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Susie Nicklin, and I'm the director of the literature team at the British Council. I'm based in our offices in London in Trafalgar Square. And it's the most enormous privilege for me to have travelled yesterday to Karachi with one of the most famous living British writers, Hanif Kureishi. This is Hanif's first trip back to Karachi in 25 years, and I really did feel very honoured being with him as he drove through the city and saw all the changes that had taken place here. He's been a fabulous support to the British Council Literature Department, and we've always really valued and enjoyed working with him so much over the years throughout his career. Just to give you a little bit of an idea about how the session will go, he's going to do a brief introduction. He'll be briefly introduced, then he'll do a reading, then there'll be Muniza and Hanif will talk among them to each other, and then he'll take some questions from the audience. There will be people around with red t-shirts like that one who will have microphones, so please do wait for one of them to come to you with a mic before you ask a question. And at the end of the session, Hanif will be signing in the author's booth at the bookshop, which is to the right, out that way. So I'd love to hand over now, please, to Muniza Shamsi, one of the most distinguished writers, critics, and anthologists here in Pakistan, who's writing a book at the moment on Pakistani English literature. So I'm going to hand over to Muniza, and she'll take on from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. It's great pleasure for me to introduce Hanif Kureishi, who is considered one of the most influential British-born writers of Asian origin and has been described as the writer who has done more than any other to alter perceptions of what it means to be British Asian. His early work foreshadows the writings of many others, ranging from Nadim Aslam to Ayub Khan Deen. The Times has named him one of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. Playwright, screenwriter, novelist, short story writer, essayist, film director, and teacher, Hanif Kureishi was born in London in 1954, the son of a British mother and a Pakistani father, Rafiu Shan Kureishi. He was encouraged to write by his father, who belonged to a family of Pakistani English writers, ranging from journalist Umar Kureishi to poet Maki Kureishi, as most of you knew, and his cousins are out here in full force. Many of them writers, such as Nusrat Nasrullah and Shireen Haroon. Hanif read philosophy at King's College, London, and in 1921 his play Outskirts won the George Devine Award for the most promising playwright. Much of his early work, including his famous screenplay My Beautiful Laundrette, looks at issues of ethnicity and fascism and racism, and asserts a Britain that is multicultural, not monocultural. The screenplay received an Oscar nomination, a BAFTA Award, a New York Film Critics Award, all for the best screenplay, and he was the first writer of Pakistani origin to have received these honors.
Thank you. Like many Indians, my dad was small, but he was also elegant and handsome, with delicate hands and manners. And he was broad and strong too. When young, my dad had been a boxer and a fanatical chest expander. He was as proud of his chest as our next-door neighbours were of their new kitchen range. Dad told me that in India he had shaved his chest regularly so that its hair would sprout more luxuriantly in the years to come. I reckon that Dad's chest was the one area in which he'd been forward-thinking. Soon my mother, who was in the kitchen, came into the room and she saw my dad practicing for the Yoga Olympics. And she said, oh God, Haroon, all the front of you is sticking out and everyone can see. She turned to me and she hissed, you encourage him to do this. At least pull the curtains. It's not necessary, Mum, I said. There isn't another house that can see us unless they're watching through binoculars. That's exactly what they are doing, she said, watching us through binoculars. When Dad spoke, his voice came out squashed and thin. Kareem, he said, read to me in a very clear voice from my special yoga book. So I ran and I fetched my dad's favorite yoga book, Yoga for Women. I squatted beside him and I declaimed, "This position, Salamba Sasana, revives and maintains a spirit of youthfulness, an asset beyond price. It's wonderful to know that you're ready to face up to life and extract from it all the real joy it has to offer." He grunted his approval at each sentence and opened his eyes, seeking out my mother, who had closed hers. I read on. "This position also prevents loss of hair and reduces any tendency to greyness." That was the coup. All greyness would be avoided. Dad stood up. "I feel better," he said. "By the way, Margaret, are you coming to Mrs. K's tonight? Come on, let's all go out as a family and enjoy ourselves." "But it isn't me that Eva K wants to see," said Mum. "She ignores me. I'm not Indian enough for her. I'm only English." "I know you're only English," said my dad. "But maybe tonight you could wear a sari." "It's a special occasion too," said Dad, "tonight." This was obviously what Dad had been leading up to. He waited for us to ask him about it. "What is it, Dad? What's going on tonight?" He said, "You know, they've so kindly asked me, these neighbours in Beckenham, to speak on one or two aspects of Oriental philosophy." Dad spoke quickly and then tried to hide his pride in this honour, this proof of his importance, by busily tucking his vest in. This was my opportunity. I said, "I'll come with you tonight to Eva's if you want me to." I was going to go to the chess club, but I'll force myself to miss it if you like. I said all this as innocently as a vicar, not wanting to stymie things by seeming too eager. I'd discovered in life that if you're too eager, others tend to get less eager. And if you're less eager, it tends to make others more eager. So the more eager I was, the less eager I seemed. "Okay," Dad said to me, "go and get changed." It took me several months, it seemed, to get ready. I changed my entire outfit at least 3 times. But at 7 o'clock, I came downstairs in what I knew were the right clothes for Eva K's special evening. I wore turquoise flared trousers, a blue and white flower pattern see-through shirt, blue suede boots with Cuban heels, scarlet Indian waistcoat with gold stitching around the edges, a headband, and I washed my face in Old Spice. Dad was waiting at the door for me. When Dad saw me, he suddenly looked very agitated. My dad had been in Britain since 1950, over 20 years, and yet for 15 of those years he'd lived in the South London suburbs. Yet he still stumbled around the place like an Indian who just got off the boat. And he asked me questions like, "Is it true that Dover is in Kent?" I sweated with embarrassment when Dad halted strangers in the street to ask directions to places that were 100 yards away in an area where he'd lived for almost 2 decades. But Dad's naivety made people protective, I think, and women were drawn by my dad's innocence. They wanted to put their arms around him or something, so lost and boyish did he look at times. Not that this was entirely uncontrived or even unexploited. When I was small and Dad and I sat in Lion's Corner House drinking milkshakes, Dad would send me, like a messenger pigeon, to women at other tables and have me announce to them, "My daddy wants to give you a little kissy." So my dad taught me to flirt with everyone I met, girls and boys alike, and I came to see charm rather than courtesy or honesty or even decency as a primary social grace. And I even came to like people, as you will see, who were callous and vicious, provided they were interesting. But I was sure my dad hadn't used his own gentle charisma to sleep with anyone but Mum while married. Now, though, I suspected that Mrs. Eva K, who had met Dad a year ago at a writing for pleasure class, I suspected she wanted to put her arms around my dad. Plain prurience was one of the reasons I was so keen to go to her place tonight, and embarrassment one of the reasons why Mum refused. You see, Eva K was forward, she was brazen, and she was wicked. I didn't recognize Eva K when she greeted us at the door, and for a moment I thought we'd turned up at the wrong house. The only thing Eva K wore was a full-length, multicolored kaftan, and her hair was down and out and up. She darkened her eyes with kohl, so to me she looked a bit like a panda bear. When the front door was safely shut and we moved into the darkness of the hall, Eva K hugged my dad and she kissed him all over his face. including his lips. This was the first time I'd ever seen my father kissed with any interest. Surprise, surprise, there was no sign of Mr. K. When Eva moved, when she turned to me, she was like a kind of human crop sprayer, pumping out a plume of oriental aroma. I was trying to think if Eva K. was the most sophisticated person I'd ever met, or the most pretentious, when she kissed me right on the lips, too. Then, holding me at arm's length as if I were a coat she were about to try on, she looked me all over and said, "Karima Mia, you are so exotic tonight, so original. It's such a contribution. It's so you." "Wow. Thank you, Mrs. K," I said. "If I'd had more notice, I'd have got dressed up." I felt that I was being watched, and when I looked up, I saw that Charlie, her son, who was at my school in the sixth form and almost a year older, was sitting at the top of the stairs, partly concealed by the banisters. Now Charlie was a boy upon whom nature had breathed such beauty. His nose was so straight, his cheeks so hollow, his lips such rosebuds, that people were afraid to approach Charlie. Men and boys got erections just being in the same room as him. For others, the same effect was had by being in the same country. Now Charlie lowered his head 1/32 of an inch in acknowledgement of me. "Glad to see you, man," he said, coming downstairs. Charlie embraced my dad and called him by his first name. What confidence and style he had. It wasn't like this at the chess club. What was Eva K. up to now with my dad? What was going on? She'd pushed back the furniture. The patterned armchairs and the glass-topped tables were up against the pine bookshelves. The curtains were drawn. 4 middle-aged men and 4 middle-aged women, all white, sat cross-legged on the floor, eating peanuts, drinking wine. There was some chanting music going on that reminded me of Bach. Charlie said, "Don't you love Bach?" I said, "It's not really my bag, man." He said, "Fair enough. I think I've got something that's more your bag upstairs." "Where's your dad?" I said to him. "Oh," he said, "he's having a nervous breakdown." "Oh," I said, "does that mean he's not here?" "Yeah," he said, "he's gone into a therapy center where they allow it all to happen. They give them acid to free their minds." "Wow," I said. In my family, nervous breakdowns were as exotic as New Orleans. I had no idea what a nervous breakdown actually entailed, but Charlie's dad had seemed the nervous type to me. The only time he came to our house, he sat on his own in the kitchen, crying. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
You were actually first a playwright, then a screenwriter, and after that you were sort of established before you wrote your first novel, then you went on to short stories. I wondered what impels your choice of genre. Do you have a preference for one or the other, and how do they, what does each offer?
I basically went where the paying work was and where the interest was. When I was 18, I went to work at a theatre called the Royal Court in West London. And I worked there as an usher, and I read plays, and I attended rehearsals by Samuel Beckett, and I met actors, actresses, and that was really, although I was at university at that time, that really was my education in culture. And I just wanted to be with where the action was, and the Royal Court was the theatre of John Osborne. It was also the theatre of Brecht, of Beckett, and so on. And it was a lively place. So what I would advise my kids is to go where the intelligent people are, go where the interest is, go where the creativity is. So I worked at the Royal Court for a bit, and then I worked at another theatre called Riverside Studios, which was also fascinating, full of people who were older than me, intelligent. And then Channel 4 started in the early 80s. And they had to commission plays from Asian and black writers. And I was the only Asian or black writer they'd ever heard of, because I'd been writing plays. So I got the writing gig at Channel 4, and I began to work on the screenplay of My Beautiful Laundrette, which in fact I mostly wrote at a house round the corner from here, mostly at night because I had a jet lag, so I was so desperate for entertainment, I had to write. And I wrote most of that movie there. And that was the first time, I guess, that this sort of material to do with immigration, to do with the way Britain was changing, to do with race, to do with multiculturalism, as it later became known. That was the first time that sort of material reached a much larger audience. It's a movie, and it was big in America and in South America, and particularly in Europe and France and so on. So that was a big change in my life and a big opportunity for me when I became at last some sort of known writer. And I had money, and then I had the opportunity to write stories, essays, and I had enough money then to buy time to write the novel which I always wanted to write, which was The Buddha of Suburbia.
Well, thank you. A lot of your work is set to draw very heavily on autobiography. And in Laundrette, you said, in My Beautiful Laundrette, you said that the two boys, Johnny and Umar, kind of represented two sides of yourself. What is the relationship between autobiography and fiction, and what are the conscious and unconscious forces that impel plot and character?
Well, I was lucky in a way in terms of my material. You have to be fortunate. You have to have good luck as a writer, as well as talent and persistence and the ability to bear large amounts of boredom. And my father, who'd come from India to be educated in Britain, who'd stayed working in Britain and remained at the Pakistan embassy. So if I wrote autobiographically, if I wrote about my father, I was also writing about something that was important that was changing in Britain. And my father's journey to Britain, his life in the suburbs, his interest in Oriental